So I'm starting this video with a trigger warning. A lot of you guys are going to be offended by this topic. So let's do a really deep dive on this topic. Why do so many nice guys finish last? Well, I would say the reality is, if you're a really nice guy, that means that you're going to be extremely agreeable. And if you're too agreeable, you're always going to finish last. Now, would I consider myself to be a nice guy? I would say I used to be nicer, but I've gotten much older now. I'm, 32, about to turn 33. So I think my attitude towards being a nice guy has changed drastically over the years. Because I realized that, especially in 2025, in the modern world, being a nice guy will yield absolute zero benefits. Now, one point I really need to emphasize is this. So the lies of our mainstream media and also our schools. Yes, people like Charlie Kirk, they're right about certain things. For example, Charlie Kirk's always said that college is a scam. I don't think it's a 100% scam, but ever since I've been living in Canada for over 20 years now, ever since I first arrived in Canada, since middle school, high school, college, university, and I see all the time in mainstream media, they always telling me that so there's absolutely no differences between man and woman, except for some minor physical differences. Obviously, when you look at my face, you know I'm a dude. But nowadays in 2025, they even want to change that. They say that, men can actually compete in women's sports and vice versa. But this is the number one issue. So many people have been lied to since day one, since they were, in grade 1, grade 2, in kindergarten. They were told as a kid, there's absolute zero differences between man and woman. Well, men and women are extremely different. So being agreeable for a man is very different for being agreeable for a woman. So what do I mean by agreeableness? Sometimes if a man is way too agreeable, you just end up being a useless pushover. I'll give you guys one example. One of my roommates, Yusuf. So Yusuf, obviously, if you know by the name, he's Muslim. He's from Yemen. I'm pretty sure at this point, this guy has to be a Houthi. Honestly, so this guy, he hasn't paid rent for like 4 months. The landlord is trying to evict him, but she's having a lot of issues. This is one of the many problems with a massive uncontrolled immigration. So when I first moved into my little unit, so I'm just renting a tiny little room. And because I have a car, I decided to pay $75 extra for parking. Now, before, so this guy, Yusuf, even though he hasn't paid rent in like 4 months, he occupied the parking spot with his car. He claims he's a Uber driver. I don't think he actually has a job. I think he gets money from the government. Absolute shame. Not just on the Canadian government, also on countries like UK, Germany, Australia, USA. Why are you guys handing out checks to these fake asylum seekers? I think this guy's unemployed. Anyways, so before nobody lived in the house had a car, so the landlady agreed to Yusuf that he could occupy the parking spot. But Yusuf also signed this agreement that if somebody moved in and if they were willing to pay the parking fee, he has to move his car immediately. Now, it took me 2 days to finally get this guy to move the car. When I first moved in, first day of the month, and he said, just use the visitor's parking, just do an overnight registration, I'll show you the website. Then I called the landlady and I said, you have to move your car, you have to move your car. The landlady also said the same thing, you gotta move your car, and he just refused to do it. He's like, bro, I got this going on, this going on. So I let that one go for just one night. And then the next day, he made up a bunch of BS excuses again. He's like, I'm not doing this. I just forgot. I got stuff going on. I need to take a shower. I'm falling asleep. And this guy, he agreed to give me his phone number, right? And so on the second day, it's already 6 p.m. So I know he's in his room. So I just kept banging on the door. I called him. I texted him. He refused to answer the phone. So because sometimes, this is what I mean. As a guy, you cannot be a nice guy sometimes. You cannot be too agreeable because people just end up walking all over you. So I started viciously kicking the door to the point where I was almost going to break it. Then after about 10 minutes, he finally opened. I told him, I said, you're going to FUCKING move your car right now. You're not even paying rent. You're not paying for parking. I'm paying $75 a month for parking. You were supposed to move yesterday. It's been over 30 hours, so just get on it. And I think that's when he actually got a little bit scared. So this is what I mean. Sometimes as a guy, when someone is just being a 100% pain in the ass, and sometimes you're forced to take actions. And as a guy, if you're too agreeable, I've experienced that for most of my life. People will walk over you. Now, generally speaking, once again, I'm talking about on average, if you look at the agreeableness scale, so for man and woman, it's very, very similar. Perhaps the man on average are slightly more disagreeable. So the graph probably looks something like this. Let's say this is the average. So men tend to shift this way towards non-agreeable, and women will shift slightly to the right towards very agreeable. However, so if you look at, let's say, the 1%, the top 1% of the people who are the most agreeable, very agreeable. So almost all of these are women. And generally speaking, if you look at the other end of the extremes, if you look at the 1% of the population that is the most non-agreeable, generally speaking, these are all men. Now, this is also a massive issue, even though, being a really, really nice guy is a huge problem. But if you're the top 1% of people who are the most non-agreeable, that means that you're going to be extremely confrontational all the time. And sometimes you're going to lose control of your emotions. And this is exactly why, if you look at, let's say, the demographics of the current US prisons, the vast majority of them are young men. And by the way, if you guys are wondering, how come, the 1% of the most agreeable people, the VA group, right, the very agreeable, how come almost all of them are women? Well, it's because this. Generally speaking, once again, women do not want confrontation. And just like the example I've given you guys, imagine if I was a woman, I just moved into the house and I paid $75 for parking. And if I'm up against this guy, Yusuf, imagine now I'm 6 inches shorter, I weigh 50 pounds less, and my physical strength has been cut in half. Would I actually bang on Yusuf's door really, really loud for 10 minutes? Would I actually try to kick the door open to force him to move the car? Probably not. I would probably just have to stay silent, and I would probably call the landlady again to try to get this issue resolved. So as you guys can see, so there are so many differences between man and woman, and I'll give you guys more examples. So if you think more about this agreeableness versus non-agreeableness, for example, let's say I have a couple of guy friends. Let's say I was extremely lucky. Somehow I got a chance to go on a date with, let's say, Madison Beer. Now, let's say if I have a couple of guy friends, they're like my best friends. We're really, really good buddies. We have a really good relationship. And I ask these guys, do you guys think I actually have a chance to score Madison Beer as my girlfriend? You know what the honest reactions would be from these two guys? They will be saying, dude, have you not seen yourself in the mirror? You think you can actually score Madison Beer? Dude, you're ugly as man. Look at you, man. Like you're short, you're broke, you got no money, you got student loans, you drive a 2017 Hyundai Elantra. Never mind a Madison Beer. Like even a big fat white girl, she would never even look at you. But this is what I mean. That would be an honest reaction if I had actually two really, really close guy friends. Well, at least, they're being 100% honest because, yes, sometimes the truth will hurt, but at the end of the day, I know better than anybody else. For the vast majority of men out there, as a matter of fact, unless you can provide something financially, the vast majority of the women, they will never look at you. But this is where women are very, very different. This is what I mean. So if you look at the top 1% of the most agreeable people, almost all of them are women because the people who are most agreeable, so they will lie in order to avoid confrontation. Now, it's one thing for a woman to lie to avoid confrontation, but any man who does that, you know what kind of vibe that gives you? It's like, those people, white dudes for Harris, yeah, or those soy boys, or those guys who are casted as a background extra, let's say in a scene for a Black Raw or something, and he's just sitting there in the corner with his head lowered, and while he's watching his snow bunny girlfriend getting absolutely impaled by two black guys. So yeah, that's what happens when a guy becomes too agreeable. Because oftentimes, if you're extremely agreeable, you have to lie all the time. And you just end up turning yourself into a cuck. So the ugly friend example, right? It's the same thing. Let's say this time I'm a woman. But let's say if I'm a really, really ugly, like 1 out of 10. Let's say I'm a really, really ugly, big, fat Chinese girl. And let's say just, by a random chance, some miraculous chance, I get to have a chance to go on a date, let's say with Henry Cavill. So Superman, right? Millionaire actor, tall, good looking, in shape. And let's say you've had two really, really close female friends. And before I go on the date, I asked them, do you ladies think I actually have a chance at scoring with Henry Cavill, with Superman? Do you guys think I can become a Superman's girlfriend? Now, keep in mind, I'm like this really, really fat, really, really ugly, big fat Chinese girl. But instead of the honest reactions I get from my guy friends, these two female friends this time, because generally speaking, women are more agreeable, they will straight up lie to my face. They will say that, oh yes, you girl, you are so gorgeous. You're like the most beautiful woman in the world. You're on par with Madison Beer, with Tate McRae, with Victoria Justice, with prime Jennifer Connelly. You go out there and you go get Superman because you deserve a top 0.1% man because you're a queen. You're all of this. And this is a massive issue because oftentimes, when people become too agreeable, they will just straight up lie about anything. And once again, it's very different for a man to be extremely agreeable versus a woman who is extremely agreeable. Because if you ask a guy, if you're telling this big fat Chinese girl those things, you're saying that she's actually a top 1% woman, she's a queen, she's the most beautiful woman in the world, then I'm sorry to say you're not going to make it in this world, especially with the way things are in 2025. This is what I mean. This is why oftentimes nice guys will end up finishing last. As a guy, oftentimes you cannot be too agreeable. Understand, obviously, this side of the spectrum is very bad because if you're extremely non-agreeable, you're going to be extremely confrontational. But just like the example I've given you guys with my roommate Yusuf, sometimes, you really have to just kick the door really, really hard. And you gotta force this guy to move his car because he's not paying for that parking spot. He's not even paying rent, so you have to force him to move. This is why a man and woman are very different. Because if I was involved in that same scenario, but this time I'm a tiny little 5 feet tall and 95-pound Asian woman, I should probably avoid any confrontation with this guy Yusuf. By the way, so these kind of traits, yes, most people are born with it. However, most of this can be corrected if you're born into a stable nuclear family. Generally speaking, your parents, they have to correct these traits before you turn 4 years old. So what do I mean? So generally speaking, ideally for a woman, it's better for a woman to be here. Not extremely agreeable because that can cause a lot of issues as well. But generally speaking, on the right side of the scale, maybe right here. Generally speaking, for men, once again, you don't want to be here. This is very bad. This can turn you into a career criminal. You're going to be getting into fights all the time. You probably want to be here. If you're a child who is not born into a stable nuclear family, generally speaking, what happens by the time you turn 4 years old, you will turn into a moody person. What do I mean by moody? So every single human being on earth can be categorized into these two categories. You're either moody or you're not moody or non-moody. What do I mean? So I'll give you guys an example. Karen. Once again, this is what I mean. So Karen obviously is a term that's popped up since maybe 2020, is generally to describe a crazy white woman. But I think you can use it to describe any woman. We'll just use Karen. But I think, yes, there's also a term for a black woman. It's called a Keisha. And yes, there's also a word for Chinese woman. So what is a Chinese female Karen? It's called mu ye cha, if you're wondering. But we'll just say we can categorize all of these women into Karens. So if you guys have actually been observing and studying the behaviors of these modern day Karens, you will notice something in real life. You will never ever see two Karens at the same time. Well, certainly they're not going to be friends. See, this is what I mean. So the non-moody people, yes, they can stay together. They can become best friends. They can become co-workers. They can be classmates. They can get married. And sometimes, in some cases, a moody person can marry a non-moody and they can still make things work. But you will never ever see two people who are moody who are together. I'm talking about co-workers. I'm talking about classmates. A boyfriend, girlfriend in a relationship or marriage. Even if they somehow get together, it will never ever work out because generally speaking, the moody person is going to be extremely non-agreeable. And there's a famous saying in China. It's called two tigers cannot live on the same mountain. So when you have two people that's extremely non-agreeable, generally speaking, these type of people, they're going to be extremely combative. They will want to be the alpha and they will want to talk over everybody all the time. That's why every time you see these screaming Karens together, either scenario A, they're alone, or a scenario number B, they have a quiet female friend who never talks, who never says anything, and she will just stand there and listen to her friend scream all day long. You never see two guys that's like that. If you see a male Karen, that guy is guaranteed to be single and alone. It's probably going to end up being a career criminal. It's only in some odd cases you can see a female Karen with a really, really quiet friend who is non-moody. Yeah, just really think about it. And the reason why, sometimes these Karens can actually have a friend, they can find a non-moody friend, is because once again, the 1% of the very agreeable, of the most agreeable people, generally they're all women, and sometimes if a Karen, she can get herself a quiet friend, it's going to be from this group. A lot of this can be corrected at a very young age. Imagine if you're going to a pet store. Imagine if you're trying to buy a cat or dog. You guys will know that every single cat, every single dog, it doesn't matter what breed they are. Every single one of them are going to be different. There's just some cats and dogs who just loves to play. They're just happy all the time. Or sometimes, you could get a Chihuahua who are just barking like just really angry all the time. And there's also going to be a bunch of cats and dogs going to be this really big suck. They just want to look sweet and innocent all the time, and they just want to snuggle right next to you so that you can give them some treats. And there are also going to be some cats and dogs who are just naturally loners, who are just naturally depressed, and they just want to sit in the corner. They don't want to bark or meow, and they don't want to say anything, and they don't want to have any friends. They don't like any guests. They just want to live a lonely and peaceful life. And it's the exact same thing for humans. But in the cases when someone is being raised by a single mother or with no parents at all, generally speaking, what happens is that by the time they're 4 years old, whatever their personality traits they are has already been set in stone, and it's going to be almost impossible to change it. So if you're raised in a single mother home, the chances are you're going to be moody, and you're going to be extremely non-agreeable. If you guys don't believe me, so just look at all of the female OnlyFans content creators. Just look at all the strippers, all the prostitutes, the adult film stars, all of the women who are doorknobs, who are town bicycles, any woman that has a triple-digit body count. You can ask them one very simple question. Do you have a good relationship with your father? Yeah, it's that simple. And it's the same thing. Just go ask any male gangster, ask any male school dropout, ask any male rapper wannabe. Just ask any murderer, ask any arsonist, ask any career criminal. Ask these people, do you have a good relationship with your father? It's very important. The nuclear family is very important, because if you don't, yeah, you're going to end up here. Extremely non-agreeable, and you're going to be extremely moody. It's also very important to mention, because once you're at the age of 4, let's say once you go to daycare and kindergarten, if you do unfortunately fall into this category, so if you're non-agreeable and if you're extremely moody, well, none of the other kids are going to want to play with you. So that is going to be the start of your villain arc. So this is a ticking time bomb. This is where the root of this children's, this is where all of his or her problem starts to grow, and things will only get worse from that point on. And even if this person is able to make friends, let's say if this little 4-year-old girl is a Karen, even if she has a friend, she's probably one of those friends that's very agreeable, and she's going to be lying to her all the time because she does not want a confrontation. And there are so many more examples. And the gender wage gap. Very interesting. So I will cover this more for the next video as well. So according to the modern day liberals and the political leftists, they're saying that gender is not real. So if gender is not real, like a man can become a woman and woman can become a man, right? So how can the gender pay gap be real? And there are so many reasons for this. And I will give you guys one very obvious one. It comes down to this. Because generally speaking, men are more non-agreeable and women are generally speaking more agreeable. So men are just naturally wired to be better at negotiating wages. It's very important. And the women are just not as good as men when it comes to negotiating their wages. That's why sometimes a man can get a much better salary compared to a woman. And once again, we'll expand on this so-called gender wage gap for the next video. And so let's fast forward to the timeline. So, from all the problems starts to build when you're 4 years old, when you become extremely non-agreeable, that's when you start becoming confrontational, start to become combative. And let's say when you get to roughly, 12 to 13 years old, all the way until you're 25, what happens? Young men, they go through puberty, your testosterone levels goes through the roof. And that's when the young men, they become more violent. They start to party more. They start to drink more. They start to do drugs. They start to do things like stunt driving. They start to do all kinds of stupid stuff. Once again, right, this is one of the many contributing factors as to why, you see so many of these young men being locked up in prison. Because, you don't usually see too many middle-aged men or a bunch of old dudes that's being locked up. The vast majority of the prison demographic is made up of young men. And if you do see an old guy, it's probably because they're serving a life sentence, and they probably got locked up 40 years ago when they were only 18 or 20 years old. And generally speaking, all of this, right, from when you're 12 to 13 to roughly 25, this all fades. Once you get to 26, generally speaking, man, they become more family-oriented. They think about actually, finding a girl, finding a wife, and getting married and having children. And in order to build a family, they start to party less. They go to sleep earlier, and sometimes they don't even want to go out. So generally speaking, right, this is for the vast majority of the men. Once you turn 26, all of this crazy stuff is just naturally goes away. But now there's a brand new problem. So if you go back to 1960 in America, the average age for first marriage for men is 22, for women it's 20. So, I mean, all of this really wasn't a huge problem because generally speaking, once a man reaches the age of 26, he's biologically wired to just simply become more family-oriented. And there's going to be less violence, less partying, less drinking, less drugs, less crazy stuff. But now, we have a new crisis in the 21st century. The rise of incels, right? So if you just look at a bunch of various studies, various surveys done in the United States, according to these surveys, roughly 1 out of 3 men in America under the age of 30 are still virgins. And another 1/3, so that's 2/3 of men under the age of 30, they have had zero sex in the past year. So only 1 out of 3 men is actually currently sexually active. And out of those men, how many are just simply going to strip clubs, or they're going to one of those Asian lady massage parlors where they're paying a couple $100s for prostitutes? How many are actually, having regular sex with a girlfriend or with their wives? It's a very, very small percentage of the population. However, things are very, very different when you ask, these women in the U.S. under the age of 30. According to these, surveys, self-reported surveys anyways, roughly 90% of the women are sexually active. That's very, very interesting. So, and also roughly 60 to 70% of the women under the age of 30 are either in a relationship or married. So how can that be? If 1 out of 3 men under the age of 30 are virgins, another 1 out of 3, they've had zero sex in the past year. So, well, the answer is very simple. Hypergamy. Extreme hypergamy, the rise of internet, social media, dating apps. It's easier than ever before for a top tier guy, for a guy who's, what does Andrew Tate calls it, the top G, right? To have access with any woman, anywhere in the world, right? It's not just limited to the US or Canada. This guy who's a top G, he can travel to Europe, he can travel to Asia, he can travel to Latin America. He can get any woman he wants to. So, the rise of technology has made it easier than ever before for a guy who is a very tall, very good looking, very successful, a guy with a lot of money to have access to over 90% of the women worldwide. So that's the situation we're looking at, in 2025. So basically, I would say roughly 10% of men are going through 90% of women. And I want to come back to the point of this graph once again. The 90% of the men, let's say, who are, not getting laid regularly, who are not married, who does not have a girlfriend. So I would say probably the vast majority of them, they fall right here. Well, maybe they're not very agreeable, but yeah, they're certainly on the right side of the graph, where generally speaking, that's where most women are. And let's say the 10% of men who are just going through all the women. They have their own harem. They have girlfriends, side chicks, situationships. So they got everything going for themselves. And most of these men, they're not right here. This is also very bad. They're probably right here. Right here. Once again, this is the average, right? This is neutral. And so generally speaking, as a guy, you want to be right here, halfway between not agreeable at all versus neutral. So you want to be here once again. And as a woman, you probably don't want to be here, very agreeable, because it just makes you a pushover. And you become a serial liar. You have to lie about everything all the time in order to avoid confrontations. As a woman, you should be right here. About, once again, that's neutral. About halfway between neutral and very agreeable. So much more I want to talk about, but this video is already getting so long. So this video will be continued on Wednesday. What am I going to talk about on Wednesday? Another topic I think that is going to be very intriguing to the vast majority of you. I'm going to cover the topic of why a man fear women with ambition. Yes, ambition for man versus woman is very, very different. And when a woman has too much ambition, especially career-wise, that is going to be a #1 fear factor for men. That is going to turn so many men away from that woman. So this topic, once again, is going to be continued. So part 2 of this video will be released this Wednesday. Thank you guys so much for watching and staying all the way until the end. I will see you guys on Wednesday.